Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take the fire hose of information, your articles, your research, your notes, and distill it down to pure, actionable insight. Today, we are wading into what is arguably one of the most fraught, most emotionally charged conversations in modern life, the choice not to have children.
It's an instant volatility trigger, isn't it?
Totally.
The second this topic enters the room, rational conversation often just flees. We see the choice to be child-free constantly being reduced to these simple, often cruel accusations.
Oh, yes.
Selfish, you'll regret it, you just haven't met the right person. When in reality, the psychological and societal drivers behind this decision are profoundly layered. They're rooted in an intense, almost radical level of self-awareness.
Exactly. And our mission today is to move entirely past that noise. We had a stack of sources here, everything from in-depth psychological profiles and social commentary to extensive research transcripts detailing the core drives behind the decision. We're not here to debate the merits of parenthood versus non-parenthood. We are here to understand the why. We want to offer you, the listener, the language to articulate the genuine psychologically valid reasons people make this decision, and critically, to analyze why this choice often sparks such intensely defensive and hostile reactions from others.
You know, when we synthesize these sources, the overarching theme that emerges is the sheer power of the default life. It's so universally accepted, school, career, marriage, children, that deviating from it isn't just seen as a personal preference. It's perceived as a rejection of societal norm, a kind of philosophical attack on the sense. The individual who chooses to be child-free is often forced into a position of being incredibly self-aware in ways that people who simply follow the default path may never have needed. They have meticulously examined every potential trade-off, every sacrifice, and every alternative.
Let's immediately anchor this to a relatable scenario. This came from one of our core sources. Imagine the woman, she's, say, 32 years old. She's thriving in a highly demanding field. She's happy, financially stable, has a supportive partner.
She's checked all the boxes.
Every single one. By every metric of societal success, she's thriving. Yet, because she has been open about her decision not to have children, her family treats her like a teenager who hasn't thought things through, predicting regret. Her peers imply she's missing the core human experience.
And society, through media and cultural messaging, implies something is fundamentally wrong with her desire.
And that profound disconnect, the highly successful, stable adult who is simultaneously labeled deficient or incomplete, that's where the conflict lives.
It is. The psychological research is clear. The person making the conscious choice to be child-free has often done vastly more internal reflection, more emotional labor, and more future forecasting than the person who's simply followed the path of least resistance, parenthood. They have scrutinized their own mental capacity, they've analyzed the sustainability of their finance, reviewed their history, and assessed the current state of the world, and only then made an intensely informed, intense decision.
And this leads us to that fascinating immediate observation that came up again and again in the sources.
Saying, I don't want kids, is an almost instant conversation stopper.
Oh, it's the fastest.
It ends dialogue faster than discussing politics or religion at the dinner table. Why? Because people are immediately put on the defense. They perceive the choice as an attack on their identity, on their life, even though the statement is purely self-referential.
Exactly. You're just stating a preference for your own life, but it is received as a critique of theirs. It creates that uncomfortable cognitive dissonance you mentioned. If you are happy, complete, and deeply fulfilled without the very thing that I structured my entire adult identity around, well, what does that imply about the necessary nature of my choice?
Right.
It's a very primal defensive reaction to protect the sanctity of the self-narrative. The self-aware, child-free person is essentially holding up a mirror, forcing the other person to confront the possibility that their monumental investment might have been optional. That sets a very intense state. So since we've established that the choice is rooted in profound self-awareness, let's now look at how society attempts to pressure that self-awareness into submission.
Using the same old lines.
The same old line. Let's move right into section 2, where we dissect the weight of societal pressure. So we know these lines by heart. You're at the inevitable gathering, the family barbecue, whatever it is. And the moment someone finds out about the child-free decision, the judgmental, sometimes passive-aggressive comments start rolling in. They are delivered with an almost mandatory air of superiority, as if they possess the mandatory secret knowledge of human existence.
They function as the standard lines of societal enforcement, They're designed to bring the perceived outlier back into the fold. The sources clearly identify the big three.
Let's hear them.
You'll regret it. You're selfish. And the incredibly condescending, it's different when they're yours. And while they may sound like gentle, future-focused advice on the surface, their true function is to invalidate years of careful, often painful, consideration.
Okay, let's scrutinize that point about invalidation. The expert analysis in our sources points out that these lines are spoken like they are helpful. right?
Oh, always. I'm just trying to help.
As though the child-free individual is merely confused or suffering from a temporary lack of vision. They completely disregard the fact that the person being addressed has likely spent years running mental simulation, imagining every possible future, weighing the deep, personal pros and cons, and has chosen the path that they believe provides the highest quality of life and wholeness for them.
Precisely. The child-free individual has usually agonized over the concept of regret far more intensely than the average casual parent followed the trajectory.
That's a really good point.
They have rehearsed the potential future scenarios of an empty nest hundreds of times, and their analysis led them to the conclusion that the regret of not living their true autonomous life is a far greater existential threat than the regret of missing out on parents. So when someone dismisses that choice with a glib, trivializes profound
And the sources call this out as a form of psychological violence because it's an attempt to erase complex self-knowledge with a single condescending phrase. But let's ask the deeper question, the one that touches on that threat to the status quo. Why is it so crucial for others to insist that the child-free person is fundamentally wrong or incomplete?
This is where we have to discuss cognitive dissonance. And society heavily promotes the idea that parenthood is the only path to true meaning, fulfillment, and lasting adult happiness.
The only one.
The only one. And this consensus requires immense sacrifice from this financial resources, personal time, career advancement, physical autonomy. Now, if someone can demonstrate that they achieved genuine, deep, sustained happiness without making that sacrifice, well, it fundamentally destabilizes the justification for the parents entirely.
So the idea that their sacrifice was a choice and not a mandatory requirement for happiness creates immediate psychological distress for the parent.
Yes.
They look at the freedom of the child-free individual and see the cost of their own decision magnified.
It forces a brutal internal question. Did I make this monumental sacrifice because I truly wanted it, or because I complied with what I was told I should want?
That's a scary question to ask yourself.
It is. So the easiest way to resolve that dissonance is to attack the evidence of the alternative path. If the child-free person is labeled selfish, immature, or doomed to regret, then the parent's path is validated as the morally superior or necessary. The pressure becomes a highly effective defense mechanism against the parent's own submerged doubt.
And the interesting contrast here, which our research really highlighted, is the difference between chosen sacrifice and mandated sacrifice. Many parents deeply love their children, of course, but they might resent the mandated loss of identity or autonomy that came with the role.
And the child-free person embodies the unmandated life. They hold up the ideal of radical authority. They represent the life where personal needs and self-preservation were placed first. It's much easier for the parent to project anger onto that authenticity than to look at their own suppressed resentment over the life they left behind. It's an unspoken societal agreement, really. We all made this sacrifice, so you must too, or you expose us as possibly having had a choice.
Wow. Okay, so if the external pressure is merely a loud defense mechanism, we need to focus inward. Let's dedicate the next substantial portion of our deep dive to Section 3 and unpack the three distinct, psychologically grounded profiles that explain the real reasons people choose this path. This is the heart of our mission today. All right, this segment is where we transition fully from societal accusation to genuine self-analysis. We're going to structure this by diving into the core motivation for each group, providing the labels the sources use to give you, the listener, multiple perspectives on the same central drive.
And this deep dive shows these individuals aren't just saying a casual no to kids. They are saying an emphatic yes to a specific, meticulously designed life that is often impossible to maintain alongside the demands of parenthood.
Let's start with type 1, the people we've termed the protector of identity and autonomy.
Our sources identify this group using two powerful labels, the Autonomy Protector and the Fulfillment. Their core drive is a non-negotiable need for intense control over their own life, and above all, the preservation of their deeply established person.
I love that frame. They are not primarily running away from children. They are running towards a life that demands freedom as a kind of essential life-sustaining oxygen.
Exactly. Their self-preservation instinct is highly. They view the parental journey, particularly the early, as an existential threat to the self they have painstakingly constructed.
So it's not about hating kids.
No, not at all. They don't hate children. They fundamentally reject the idea of their their time, their focus, their creative bandwidth being consumed, dictated, and redirected by someone else's total.
Did the sources provide specific mechanisms for why this trade-off is so threatening to them? I mean, what exactly are they protecting?
They're often protecting the flow state.
The flow state, okay.
These individuals often find their deepest meaning and success through intellectual pursuit, creative endeavors, or high-focus professional work that requires long, uninterrupted blocks of concentration. The sources illustrate that they recognize that parenthood is the ultimate destroyer of flow state.
Oh, for sure.
It replaces sustained focus with constant fragmentation. For the Autonomy Protector, losing their capacity for deep work isn't just a minor career setback. It is the death of their primary source source of self-worth and purpose.
And they've seen it happen. They have watched the great identity trade-off happen in real time, often among their friends and family. They have seen the high-achieving colleagues suddenly vanish from their field or the artists stop producing. The sources describe it perfectly. Watching the mother become just a mom, or seeing the father's vibrant dreams filed indefinitely under maybe someday. And the Autonomy Protector looks at that and decides that potential erasure is non-negotiable for me.
And the psychological insight here is critical. Their brain is running a sophisticated risk analysis. It knows that parenting profoundly rewires your priorities and often forces you to deprioritize your core self for 2 decades. For these personality types who are fulfilled by being highly self-directed, their internal calculator concludes, I cannot risk losing the self I have spent decades building and refining, because that self is my source of happiness.
It's so important to stress this point, especially since society labels them selfish. This isn't selfishness in the sense of greed or malice. It is radical self-awareness.
Yes, that's the term.
They know the fundamental requirements for their personal equilibrium. If they require those slow mornings, that uninterrupted focus, or the freedom to suddenly drop everything and travel for 2 months, adding a child doesn't enhance that life. It replaces it with an entirely different, highly constrained existence.
And the sources emphasize that they are prioritizing the creation of things that are not, whether it's significant art, social movements, world-changing businesses, or deep personal exploration. Their choice is an intentional, affirmative action to maintain the life required to those non-procreate. They realize that for them, having a child would mean sacrificing the very essence of their personal.
Let's pivot now to type 2. This is a group often characterized by cold logic, but I think, as we'll see, it's something much deeper. We're calling them the radical responsibility and clarity profile.
Yes, these are the future calculators and the responsibility calculators. Their core drive is honesty, sometimes brutal honesty, regarding external stability, environment, economic. Their decision is externally focused, centered on the fairness of bringing a new, vulnerable life, the current global.
So they're the ones who look at the big picture, maybe too clearly for their own comfort. Yeah. And they ask that difficult question that makes every parent squirm a little.
Yeah.
Is it ethical right now to create a person whose life will be defined by inheriting this profound collective mess?
And they are not dealing in vague fears. They are calculating measurable data points. The sources detail the specific, difficult global and economic issues they weigh. We're talking about the escalating climate crisis, which fundamentally threatens long-term stability.
Yeah.
The intense political and social chaos witnessed globally. The immense economic, the crushing weight of student loans, the inaccessibility of housing, and the skyrocketing costs of raising a child, particularly daycare, which often equals or exceeds a mortgage.
That's a huge one. The reality is the current societal and economic infrastructure in many Western nations just isn't built to support new parents in a healthy way.
Not at all.
You see dual-income households working themselves into burnout just to maintain a baseline of stability. The calculator observes this struggle, performs the arithmetic, and recognizes the immense, unsustainable burden they would be placing on themselves and, crucially, on the potential child.
And that clarity leads to a powerful, compassionate. The sources cite a highly significant demographic data, which is crucial for understanding the scale of it.
Okay, what is it?
39% of adults under 35 state definitively that they do not want ever.
Wow, 39%. That's nearly 2 in 5 young adults.
It is. And the research correlates this rise specifically with concerns over climate change and economic inequality.
That reframes the motivation entirely. It is not pessimism, it is radical ethical responsibility. They refuse to use a child as a personal solution to their own fulfillment or to merely check a societal box.
Exactly. They are refusing to pass a collective trauma, the trauma of economic precarity and environmental instability, forward onto a new generation.
It's the ultimate expression of ethical foresight. They won't gamble with someone else's well-being just because they feel a biological or social urge to reproduce.
They see the constraint, they see the suffering of the current generation, and they make a clear-eyed statement: I cannot fix the world, and I will not force a child to inherit this unfixable struggle. This perspective requires immense...
But wait, did the sources explore the nuance here? I mean, what about the accusation that this is just paralyzing anxiety masquerading as responsibility?
They did, and the distinction they draw is that paralyzing anxiety stops act. Radical responsibility informs a deliberate positive act, which in this case choiced out. The calculators aren't paralyzed, they're highly motivated to improve the world through other means, but they view creating a life as compounding the problem, not. They are choosing non.
That is a deep dive in itself. That shift from you're selfish to you are responsibly recognizing your limitations and the state of the world is monumental.
And that leads us directly to type 3, which the sources label as the darkest reason. But I agree with you, it might be the most profoundly
Trauma.
This group is labeled the pattern breaker and the cycle. Their core drive is a conscious, intentional decision to stop generational pain, dysfunction, or mental health struggles from being passed down through a lineage.
Their motivation is steeped in personal history. These individuals have often carried immense weight their entire life. They may have endured childhood trauma, lived through highly chaotic or neglectful family environments, or battled severe inherited mental health conditions like chronic depression or anxiety that dramatically impact function.
And the decision is driven by one powerful, unshakable principle. This cycle of pain, chaos, or dysfunction stops. They have internalized the cost of broken parenthood through lived experience. They didn't just see what it did to their parents. They experienced what it did to them.
They saw the silent exhaustion that never lifted, the mother's resentment simmering beneath the surface, the way a parent's unchecked neuroses destroyed the possibility of a stable child.
And they are avoiding becoming the ghost version of themselves, the parent who is physically present but emotionally absent, repeating the exact mistakes of the lineage.
This requires immense ethical self-reflection because they look at their own capacity and their own history and say, I recognize the high risk that I might repeat the mistakes of my parents, even unintentionally, because those patterns are so deeply ingrained.
Yeah.
And instead of crossing their fingers and promising, I'll do better, they make the intentional decision to take themselves out of the equation.
Consider the examples provided. Someone who struggled intensely with crippling anxiety understands that having a child would not only overwhelm their coping mechanism, but would risk passing down that mental health battle or modeling unhealthy emotional regulation. They are refusing to expose a child to a chaos they have spent their adult lives trying to manage or dismantle.
But let's look at the counter-argument here. Did the sources get into that?
Yeah.
Isn't there a risk that this hypervigilance against repeating pain could actually become a new form of cycle, an isolating one, perhaps rooted in fear?
That nuance is key, and yes, they did. The sources argue that while the decision is difficult and often lonely, it is distinct from simple fear. It is a decision rooted in protection. A cycle breaker often pursues healing and self-improvement relentlessly, but they recognize that healing the generational wounds they carry is a full-time endeavor that may not be compatible with raising a stable, well-adjusted human being. They're protecting the potential child from the collateral damage of their own necessary, ongoing recovery.
And yet society insists on labeling this choice as selfish.
Absolutely, but when you look at the intent, refusing to inflict pain, refusing to pass down dysfunction, choosing to bear the burden yourself rather than adding a new victim to the generational drama, the sources argue that this is one of the most profoundly selfless acts a human can commit.
Wow.
It requires deep psychological bravery to look at your lineage and say, the trauma ends here, even if it means sacrificing affected biological leg. It is a protective, highly intentional act.
So, to synthesize these three profound motivations, we have the Autonomy Protector running towards self-identity, the Future Calculator refusing the risk of external global struggle, and the Cycle Breaker refusing to perpetuate internal historical pain.
Yeah.
None of these reasons are frivolous, confused, or selfish. They're all rooted in intentionality and intense self-awareness.
And that intentionality is the central revelation of this entire deep dive. People who choose not to have kids aren't uncertain or lost. They are, in fact, hyper-certain about their needs, their limitations, and their moral selves and the world.
This level of intentionality leads us perfectly into Section 4, because if they are not finding fulfillment through the traditional route of children, the obvious question for the non-child-free audience is, where do they find meaning? And the research had a very illuminating caveat.
The finding is crucial for a balanced. Research shows that people without kids aren't necessarily happier than parents. They're simply happy differently. The key realization is that neither path Jack Purier. They are merely different, equally valid route to the ultimate destination of...
Okay, let's define those two fundamentally different paths to joy, because they rely on distinct psychological mechanisms for meaning creation.
So the parental path to joy is often rooted in legacy. They find deep and powerful meaning in watching someone grow in the sense of biological contribution and in a purpose that outlives them.
Right.
This joy is profound, sacrificial, and intensely forward-looking, tied up in investment in the future generation. It's a joy defined by connection and immortality through lineage.
Okay, so contrast that with the child-free path to joy.
Their fulfillment often comes from presence. It is rooted in the immediacy of experience, in deep and chosen familial bonds, often through friendships, and in the creation of things that are not people.
Art businesses.
Art, movements, businesses, or intellectual property. The joy is rooted in deep engagement with the existing world, immediate connection, and self-directed creation within their own lifetime.
So it's directional, not qualitative.
Exactly. One looks forward through the lens of a new generation. The other looks around through the lens of deeper, unconstrained engagement with the present. Both methodologies are robust ways to achieve psychological well-being.
But the relentless societal pressure we discussed earlier is rooted in a highly modern, individualistic misconception that everyone must reproduce, often framed as a biological imperative. We need to introduce the historical context, because history and sociology actually confirm that the idea of mandatory universal parenthood is a contemporary myth, and it's inaccurate.
For millennia, human societies survived and thrived based on the village model.
The village.
It was a synergistic. Yes, some people were required to reproduce, but survival and complexity relied equally on others who didn't, but instead contributed their specialized skill. Aunts, the uncles, the mentors, the healers, community specialists, they provided wisdom, specialized.
So not everyone reproduced biologically.
No, but everyone contributed to the survival and enrichment of.
That is a critical distinction that the sources hammer home. Genetic contribution was necessary, but so was the specialized non-reproductive. If everyone was solely focused on raising their own nuclear family unit, who would have had the time or mental space to study the stars, compose the complex music, build the complex infrastructure, or teach the non-survival skills that elevate a civilization?
Exactly. The child-free person historically wasn't an anomaly or a selfish outcast. They occupied a specialized contributing role. They freed up resource, time, attention, energy, and money that could be poured into the collective good, benefiting the children of the community who needed extra support or developing societal infrastructure.
And that alternative contribution is the true measure. Some are here to create art, some to teach other people's children, some to build things, explore the world, or love deeply and provide stability to their community without raising a child.
And this isn't laziness or selfishness. It is functional self-knowledge, a recognition of where one's energies can be most productively and happy.
It allows us to view the child-free choice not as a deficit, but as a different kind of positive force. It reframes the individual from someone who avoided responsibility to someone who specialized their contribution for the greater, wider community.
And this historical and biological truth is often lost entirely in the intense focus of your family today.
We've established the deep, genuine, and often selfless motivations behind the choice. Now, we must tackle the core conflict one last time in Section 5, the uncomfortable truth. This is where we look at the interaction between the parent and the child-free individual and why the hostility and judgment are so reliably triggered.
Let's reiterate the central truth drawn from the psychological. When someone aggressively attacks a child-free choice, it is absolutely not about the child-free. It is a profound expression of the attacker's own internal conflict, a defense mechanism known as projection.
The happy, fulfilled, child-free individual is essentially holding up a very clear, unwelcome mirror to the parent.
Yeah.
And that reflection forces the parent to look at a question they are terrified to articulate, let alone answer. Did I actually choose this life, or did I simply comply with the established social script because it was the easiest, most expected thing to do?
The choice of the child-free person highlights the parent's immediate lack of freedom, constant grinding constraint on time and finance. The child-free person's clarity exposes the parent's potential confusion or the suppressed desire for the path not taken.
Their boundary setting.
Their boundary setting reminds the parent that they never fully set any for themselves before the children arrive. The resulting anger is never actually about the other person's life. It's about the exhaustion, the loss of self, and the submerged resentment the parent may have buried beneath decades of school pickups and financial stress.
Let's try to put a finer point on that resentment. It is often complicated, right? A parent can love their children fiercely, unconditionally, and yet simultaneously resent the loss of personal identity or the sheer, unrelenting weight of the responsibility that came with them.
Absolutely.
The child-free individual, walking around unburdened by those constraints, serves as a constant shimmering reminder of that path of freedom the parent ruling.
That buried exhaustion is the exact fuel for the projection. If the parent acknowledges that the child-free person made a wise, self-aware choice, they implicitly acknowledge the complexity and often the profound hardship of their own.
Right.
They may have gained unimaginable love, but that gain came at the cost of intense, unrelenting labor and sacrifice that was ultimately optional.
And the psychological mechanism is surprisingly simple. They must maintain the necessity of their sacrifice for their own survival.
For their own sanity, yeah.
They call the child-free choice selfish because if the child-free person is wrong and incomplete, then the parent is right, and they desperately need to be right. Because the alternative, the thought that they made all those sacrifices, gave up their deepest professional and personal dreams, and suffered immense fatigue unnecessarily, is psychologically unbearable.
It becomes a desperate ritual of validation. If fulfillment can be found without that sacrifice, the parents' decades of effort lose their mandatory sacred status. The social pressure, therefore, functions as a collective effort to maintain the illusion that parenthood is the only true way to achieve meaning, thereby justifying the collective burden and sacrifice of the group.
So if you, the listener, have been on the receiving end of that pressure, take a moment to realize that the hostility or the anger you are receiving is rarely a judgment on your character or your capacity.
Rarely, if ever.
It is almost always an expression of the other person's own internal unresolved conflict and their fear of the road not taken.
And this is the empowerment the sources provide. You are not responsible for managing or resolving their internal conflict. Your choice is valid, highly informed, and deeply self-aware, regardless of whether it validates their life.
That is an incredibly powerful foundation to wrap up this deep dive on. As we transition into our final thought, let's provide that final validation and provocation for our listeners.
The essential takeaway must be validation. Not everyone is meant for it, and that is not a deficit in human nature. It is biology and psychology being honest about individual capacity and purpose. Parenthood is not the singular path to me. It is simply the most culturally advertised.
And here's the practical empowerment for you. You do not owe anyone an explanation, a debate, or a justification for a decision that involves only your body, your resources, and your future.
You don't.
Your life is allowed to look different than the default setting. You are fully allowed to write your own script.
And we need to permanently reframe that most common accusation. Selfish. We should recognize that in this context, selfishness is merely what self-preservation and deep self-awareness look like when they finally stop apologizing for prioritizing personal well-being.
I like that, when it stops apologizing.
You are not only allowed, but you are required to be satisfied with your own life, even if that satisfaction radically contradicts the path of.
What stands out most profoundly from the entirety of the sources is the sheer intentionality and clarity of this decision. These are not confused people. They are people who looked honestly at themselves, their resources, their history, and the world they inhabit, and made a decision rooted in ethical clarity, not confusion.
Right.
That intentionality, that self-knowledge, is the very definition of wisdom.
And that wisdom is knowing the difference between what sacrifices are right for you to carry and what sacrifices are right for others. It requires intellectual maturity to recognize that immense sacrifices are non-negotiable for parenthood. And it is honorable not to acknowledge that you cannot or should not make that sacrifice.
We'll leave you with this final provocative thought, drawing from the wisdom cited in our sources. This choice is ultimately about understanding your own capacity and your true purpose. This quote applies so perfectly to the cycle breakers and the calculators, people who understood their limits and chose wisely. As the author Glennon Doyle wisely stated, we can do hard things, but we don't have to do all the hard things.
Knowing which hard things are yours to carry and which are not is the ultimate measure of self, and living by that self-knowledge is the definition of a powerful.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We hope this gave you the language and the framework to understand and navigate a profoundly misunderstood choice. We'll see you next time.